Okay, everybody, time for another round of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. My name is David Parsons. I thank you so much for tuning into the show, wherever you might be finding it on your internet dial. My guest today is Nathan Cedric Tankus. Nathan is someone who I know primarily from all these useless ideological battles many of us, for some reason, find ourselves drawn to online on places like Facebook and Twitter. And I always am interested in what Nathan has to say. I always appreciate his perspective, and it always comes with a big dose of humor, and I appreciate that. So I wanted to talk to him, and we ended up having a conversation about, he's a millennial. He's someone who is from that kind of younger generation who's embracing left socialist ideas, and he has a very particular kind of personal connection to those ideas. So we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about what he's studying and his interest in the kind of antebellum economics, which sounds like such an arcane piece of American history, but Nathan convinces me is an important part of understanding what's going on in 2016. So we talked about the election, and we talked about Bernie and Hillary and Trump, and definitely talked about Hamilton and a bunch of other stuff that's going on. I had a great time talking to Nathan. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. You can find more episodes of The Nostalgia Trap at nostalgiatrap.com, on iTunes, Stitcher, Facebook, Twitter, a whole bunch of other places. I know you can look them up. So again, thanks for listening. This is me and Nathan Tankus. But I don't know anything about you, besides the fact that I see you popping up on social media, I think Facebook and Twitter, and often our thoughts and opinions are aligned. But where do you come from originally? Where are you from?
I'm from New York, born in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Parents moved to Manhattan to a limited equity co-op when I was 4.
Oh wow, one of those.
Yeah, I'm one of those kids.
Yeah, what's that like? I think I walk by that place a lot.
It's amazing. It's one of those things you grow up with, you don't really get until later, is how insane it is to have a Manhattan apartment that's just that cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And then but it also has a political angle to it. Like there are elderly people who want to privatize, sell off, and
mm-hmm.
move to Florida or whatever, and there's like a conscious defense of that, and you kind of like think it's like, okay, well, this building exists, it seems like physically fine, although there's occasionally some issues, and yet our rent is like a fourth or a fifth or a sixth of like what other people are paying in Manhattan. Like, why is this physically possible here? And like when the seemingly the laws of the land, it doesn't apply anywhere else. So there's like a political angle with it. You grow up a little bit, but mostly it's just like you're in a Manhattan neighborhood and living on the cheap.
And there's not. I mean, I just taught a class on about the American suburbs, and some of my students did research projects on these places around New York, and one of them is like Co-op City up in the Bronx, which is another like weird place. But these co-ops that are kind of it's public housing essentially, right? But it's like affordable housing. It's not really public housing.
So there's a program called Mitchell-Lama in New York.
Yes.
Mine isn't actually Mitchell-Lama. It's like quasi Mitchell-Lama.
Right.
There's a weird political story around mine where it was started by the International Lady Garment Workers Union, and like it was a big deal. Like the opening. Kennedy was a speaker at the opening in 1962.
Wow.
When he was president.
Wow.
Eleanor Roosevelt was there. Of course, all the big union people. There was, I think Rockefeller was there too. It was like a huge deal.
And that's old school liberal stuff. I mean, you don't see that anymore at all. I mean, we're living in kind of for those that aren't in New York City, we're living through a kind of watching this kind of makeover happen to New York City, the skyline, and living in Sunset Park and walking through Sunset Park a lot. I've seen the skyline change over the years dramatically, and they've kind of built nothing but these like really skinny like luxury towers that are basically for like Russian billionaires, and it's just incredibly fucking depressing to live in New York during this like huge boom that's not for anybody.
Yeah, and it just like on a pure aesthetic level, just so ugly.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about the first Gilded Age is at least they had like some like sense of style where
Yes.
like you get like really beautiful, gorgeous buildings out of it. Whereas here we just get like nothing but these hideous glass buildings. And it seems like once you see the like most hideous glass building you've ever seen, they're just going to come up with like an even more hideous one.
Yeah.
It's insane. I mean, it's very stark in Chelsea. I mean, that's what makes this kind of like what's made it even starker for places like my co-op is we're in Chelsea, and then there's actual projects next door.
Yeah,
which is an interesting comparison too.
Of course, yeah.
Similar buildings, similar construction, but one has much more financing for upkeep than the other, and it's just like just purely a question of money.
Oh yeah, I mean inequality is like visibly on the surface everywhere in New York. Yeah. I mean, and I have the sense that it always has been, but. I think I've mentioned this before. I don't know if on the show or not. Definitely on Facebook, but like on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn, which is a long avenue, goes through all of Brooklyn. But in the area near like Park Slope, there's a check cashing store next to like an artisanal cheese shop. And if you go there, I'm not fucking kidding you. It is like a stand up comedy bit because you stand there, it's outside, or you could get like a Pulitzer Prize for like taking a photo of it because it's like. It's as stark as can be. It's like literally like rich white people getting $28 tiny blocks of cheese next to black and brown people who are lining up for food stamps or to get payday loans. And it's just unbelievable. And
in my neighborhood, there's a really crappy artisanal coffee place or whatever, like the hipster upscale Starbucks,
right?
And it's right next to like the old school corner deli. They're like on opposite corners. The coffee at the other place is so much better.
Yeah.
At the crappy place, the quote unquote crappy place is so much better.
Yeah,
it's miles ahead better. But you definitely have that kind of stark thing anywhere. And in my like the thing about the two kind of quote unquote public things is it's to me it's like the most direct comparison. Similar construction, similar like we're supposed to be providing affordable housing, but there's just purely a financing thing that's making one way and the one the other way. And but then of course there's the High Line in my neighborhood, which is just destroyed, which people didn't like quite process, but like I was aware enough at the time that like when not so much in 2008, but like in 2009, 2010, I realized that there was just gonna like push out everything.
Yeah.
And it really has. And
the High Line is kind of a representative project of this new New York.
I mean, all the if you look at the list, it's a mix of like finance people and quote unquote philanthropic,
Clinton Foundation, Chase Bank, the
What's
usual suspects.
I've been doing a big project for mine for the last year has been the antebellum economy before the Civil War.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things is that there was these turnpike companies which to build all the roads or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is investing it isn't ever directly profitable, really. There's not very much profit in because people get around the turnpikes. They do all these things, go on side roads and to get away from the tolls. But people still like invest in them, and they still get a lot of pressure to invest in them because, hey, your property values are going to go up so much more, so this is still going to be profitable to you overall.
Right.
So, but it was never conceived of as this like philanthropic thing that you're investing. It's just like you're investing means you're not being a free rider. Mm-hmm. Whereas now people donate to like get something like the High Line build, which is going to do the same or more for their property values as those people at the time, and suddenly it's this like huge philanthropic thing.
Yeah, right.
It's like that. It is, and there's this weird psychology change about around that area, and it's the exact same. It's the exact same dynamics.
Ugh, disturbing. So I mean, I always like to find out on this show, kind of like how people came to their politics. But were your parents on the left, or how was it? How did your politics develop? Where did you find this?
So it sort of like skipped a generation with my family. Like my grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and they were Bundists, and they were still leftists. And my step grandfather, who was around the longest, was who I got to talk about politics the most, was basically still a straight up socialist. He joined the Communist Party when he was 12 or 13, got arrested, but then learned more things about the Soviet Union and went back to being a Bundist. But there was definitely that generation is just has so much more political. And then his story is crazy, where he snuck. He was there during the invasion. He was on the Nazi side, snuck on into the Russian side, and then pretended to be sneaking into the Nazi side, so that they would catch him and then since he's trying to get to the Nazis, clearly he's not supposed to be there. He's supposed to be on the Russian side, and bring him to the Russian side.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the right thing was to not take citizenship.
Right.
So they would arrest you, but arresting you and sending you to a labor camp meant going further away.
Jesus.
And then he ran from that labor camp because the Nazis were literally coming and no one else would run. He was like, screw you guys. Got on a train, basically tried to take a train nearly to Kazakhstan. Got caught there. Got thrown in a labor camp, but further away this time. And
this is your grandfather?
Yeah. This is my step grandfather. Yeah.
Wow. And so, is this history something that's on the surface? Do you hear about this when you were a kid, or did you have to research this to find it?
I heard about it some. I heard about it some, but I heard it in more detail when I got older.
Yeah.
And I had a cousin who got a map and went over it with my grandfather to map it out.
Right. Nice. Map out the journey.
Yeah. But of course, from my grandparents, not my step grandfather, my grandfather and my grandmother, they had those politics, but they're also they're coming to McCarthy United States,
right?
So there's we're Kennedy Democrats, so there's sort of the Bundism, the socialist politics is sort of this is part of our heritage, and so we're going to send you to this camp where you're going to learn about our heritage, but it's not this is a politics you should subscribe to.
Right.
And so my dad didn't quite have those politics. He got into film, love old films, and basically where my family sort of got political was my mom. Her brain, this is sort of topical now, her brain sort of broke over welfare reform.
Wow.
In 96. And she was just it was the thing that really snapped for her.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And so she did the kind of sort of thing that people who aren't really political, who get political, do. They go around to all the lefty meetings. She tells me, I don't know, I wish I could find out which specific group it was, but she apparently went to this Trotskyist meeting where they were all smoking and talking about getting rid of the police, which I'm sympathetic to, but I can understand.
Cop car goes by outside. Yeah.
I can understand why it was off. Why the room was smoking Trotskyists, just taking it as an assumption you need to get rid of all the cops, was not what was appealing to her in politics at that moment.
So wait, I don't know how old you are, but how were you? Must have been young when when this is happening.
I was more than 91.
Okay, so you weren't aware of this, but you heard about it later. I was
a little I knew that my mom was freaking out about this stuff, and I knew she was going to.
So what was the nature of her problem? Was it literally you say that welfare reform broke her, and we're talking about the Clinton.
She just
welfare
is just
reform stuff.
completely just
meaning she hates the Democrats now. She sees them as sellouts.
Well, at the time, her politics has gone to permutations, but at the time it was this is just too much for me.
Right.
Where I think welfare reform was more of her awakening to just how far right the Democrats had shifted.
Right.
And yeah,
it's weird because as I talk to politics to people of different ages, everyone has their different moment where they're oh, this is where, and it really informs how they see things today. Because it's my moment, I guess I talk about it a lot, was 9/11, but I was just kind of, part of me was seeing how everyone turned to kind of see the Republican Party and George W. Bush as the problem in the world, as like and so, in other words, different from your mom who would like see welfare reform and see like look at the Democrats as like this is like what's wrong with politics in the United States is how far the Democrats have moved right. But for a while, I think like there's this complacency that like the evil is in the Republican Party, and that really bothered me, and definitely informed like my view in politics.
Yeah, I mean,
sure.
I was definitely had that sort of liberalish bug. There's a point where like I wasn't focusing on politics as much. I got politicized very, very young. Like I went to like a former Jewish commie camp. And
I feel like Wilt Menaker talked a little bit about it. I think it could be wrong. So someone else on the show came on and talked about going to a former Jewish commie camp.
Camp Kinderland?
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. But tell me about this.
Yeah, so it was just like straight up. The most politicizing thing they have their own version of the Color Wars. There's like a Peace Olympics.
Right.
And literally my first year there, I can't remember all that, but it was like Mother Jones, Haymarket. These were all the different colored teams.
Right.
Seattle 2000. So this is like literally right, like not that long after. And
after like the battle in Seattle.
Yeah, after the battle in Seattle. Yeah. I was on Seattle 2000, so we learned like literally just
but
like...
you were like a little kid. You said you were born in 91.
Yeah.
So like it's funny because like the battle in Seattle, I was born in 78, and battle in Seattle to me, like I was like, what, okay, 20 years old when that happened, 21, and it was a kind of awakening moment in part to me. So that's kind of like, I feel like we're equals in some ways because it's like your development started so early.
I sort of lost it, but at the time I was learning what the WTO and IMF was. Of course, I didn't have like a super sophisticated grasp of what it was, but like, you see, I mean,
you're like,
at this point, even exactly, like that kind of thing.
I wish more 8-year-olds knew about the IMF and WTO. That'd be fucking amazing.
I mean, it's an insanely great thing to expose kids because it puts a thing in your mind, even if you forget about it. Like you like remember later when you're looking at other things,
right?
And so I was like at the protests. I was at protests for against the Iraq War. I think I may have even going to one of the early ones against Afghanistan. But it's sort of also just I'm a kid in school or whatever, and kind of doing my own thing, doing the dejected, I hate school thing too. And so I'm still sort of political, but I'm definitely in that kind of like when I'm thinking about politics, that like the Republicans suck kind of thing.
Right.
I'm not actually sure what I would have said about Democrats. I mean, I did have the awareness of my mom and welfare reform to an extent, so I knew it wasn't like I didn't have quite the like Democrats are great, Republicans are evil, but I didn't quite have the total shift into like 2008 and the financial crisis was sort of like really the most foundational thing for me.
And what do you mean by that? I mean, 2008 was kind of a big moment for a lot of different reasons, and it's the year that Obama was elected, and it's the year that the economy collapsed, and it's all depicted in The Big Short now. We have it's so funny like how quickly we turn out like Hollywood movies about the insane apocalyptic garbage that's happening around us.
I saw X-Men yesterday, and one of the ads was for this dramatic movie about Event Horizon. Deepwater Horizon?
Oh God, really?
And it was like a parody.
Yeah.
It was just like, because it wasn't about like the environmental destruction. It was just about one man does what he needs to survive, to see his wife and daughter.
Yeah. I was like, that guy's definitely on the phone to his like FaceTiming with his wife the whole time. Yeah,
Skype. It was Skype. Skype, and then he freezes on her. I'll call you right back. It was an
well, have you seen the trailer for South Side with You?
Oh no.
There's a movie.
This is the Obama one?
Yeah. It's fucking insane.
That
you haven't watched
destroyed my brain.
Yeah.
I like actually couldn't process that this was a thing.
Yeah.
So like for those who haven't seen the ad, it's literally a movie about Barack Obama and I'm drawing
Michelle Obama's first date.
Their first date, and just
it's
like
the
him
best
showing
first
up
date
in
movie.
and showing up in this crappy car, and it's just like every stupid, boring date with like teenage hipsters, middle class, upper middle class teenage hipsters. Where one of them goes to a church, except like the conceit is, oh, wink, wink, he's gonna be president. It's just.
How can that possibly carry the movie?
It was the most revolting thing. It was the most revolting thing. Like, at least if you're gonna see like a propaganda movie about Kim Jong-un and like North Korea, like you have a sense that you are like in like a one-party state, and like you have this like awareness. Whereas people are seeing this movie just like, oh, I just like Michelle.
Well, people in America think there's a democracy. I mean, we can go back to 2008 because I want to talk about the financial crisis and the election. But I mean, we're in an election cycle right now that as much, and I participate in this as well, and I know you do too.
Yeah, of
I've
course.
seen. We're fighting it out about Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And, like, every time this fucking happens, every year, because I've been watching presidential elections my whole life, every time I'm like, I'm not going to get fucking suckered into this shit again. I'm not going to fucking get into this, like, illusion of democracy. And yet, like, here I am again. And, like, Bernie Sanders is like, this time it's different. How many times I've heard this time it's different?
Yeah.
And yet this time it is different. I don't know. How do you read all of that?
I mean, to a certain extent, it is. First, I want to say that it's surprised me how much that leftists have been surprised by Trump.
Yes,
it's been very surprising how surprised people. Like
I'm surprised that you're surprised.
Yeah, like that's been the one like thing that's really gotten me on that. Just like, really, you didn't see the Trump thing. I mean, I actually specifically thought about Trump in 2011 after the post-financial crisis, the way the Obama administration enacted. I thought that in terms of what Trump was saying then, that he had a real chance to tap into something.
Yeah.
And he basically, did what he always did every time up until this time, was just flirt with the American people, and do it a little bit and run a little bit. So maybe I'll run, and then didn't. But I really thought that if you really went all out, that there was people who would go for that. I think in general, liberals and leftists really, really underestimate how much right wingers are voting for the lesser evil too. That they are 100% voting for the lesser evil. That they have similar conversations about who is the lesser evil, whether like we should actually accelerationists, let's have Democrats for some more years to get back to us. All the arguments that we have, they have too, but they just have different values.
And are you saying that for them the lesser evil is Trump over Clinton, over Hillary?
I think Trump to a certain extent is tapping into people's lesser evils and saying, stop picking those other Republican lesser evils.
Right.
Vote for someone who's closer to what you actually, believe in. Someone who isn't just pandering to you on illegal immigration, is actually going to do something about it. Like he plays into them being sick of lesser evil in the same way that Bernie plays.
Because they feel ripped off. I mean,
100%.
I feel like most Americans feel ripped off, and that's because most Americans have been ripped off. Right?
4 years ago, I went to CPAC.
Mm-hmm. Oh God, did you really?
Yeah. I really wish I went this year. It was a mistake not to go, but it's especially good around election.
What? Okay, so for those that don't know, that aren't masochists, like what is CPAC, and why the fuck do you go there?
It's Conservative Political Action Conference. Actually, I was working on an ethnography on the Republican Club at my college, so I just went with them because it was like a free trip, and it would also be fascinating. And it really was fascinating.
Oh, I'm sure
it was. I just thought it would be an amazing experience, and it was.
Was Breitbart there?
Oh yes, it was right before he died.
Oh wow!
I saw him speak right before he died.
Wow, that was a frantic moment for him. Is that like was this the Occupy year?
This is 2012, so
okay,
post-Occupy.
Wow.
And his whole speech was about Bill Ayers and how he had dinner with Bill Ayers. and how we're on the different sides, but like I could enjoy having a glass of wine and look at this liberal elitist terrorist sort of thing. I should find a copy of that video somewhere, and he looked like he was in real, like, really struggling. Like he looked he looked visibly on stage like
he was physically unwell.
Yeah, that he was unwell. That like, let's call an ambulance right there. Like,
Jeez.
sort of.
I've seen him. There's a clip of him like shortly before he died, like screaming at a bunch of like Occupy people, and it's like quite a clip.
It might have been from that because there were protesters outside.
Yeah, and he's like calling them rapists and stuff. It's really like it actually shows the like depth of the pathos. Actually, you kind of like see this guy as like a truly disturbed individual.
Yeah,
God.
Yeah. The whole experience was me, and I heard activists talk, and so there's a main stage where they have all the big people talk. That stage is basically irrelevant. No one actually cares. Like, people show up just, oh, look, I saw this leading light or whatever. But the real action at CPAC are the meetings that aren't televised, that are in the back rooms where you can hear activists talk. And conservative activists, and they feel extremely under siege. Yeah. Like they feel like they're in a crisis.
By who?
By liberals, by the whole.
Do you think they are under siege at all? Do you buy that narrative, or is it just kind of like
to a certain extent?
misreading?
So there's an interesting thing. I heard a guy who I didn't know anything about before, but was like almost completely sure that he was a white supremacist, like it's like straight up white supremacist rather than on the down low,
right?
And he looked up later, but he had this whole talk on how Chomsky was right and Solinsky was right, but what Chomsky misses is that all those corporations are financing left of center activism, and so primarily the activism that gets financed is left of center activism, National Lawyers Guild. One other example?
ACLU,
yeah. Exactly. Which to a certain extent is true.
Right.
I mean, but it's your racist narrative is all the stronger when you can point to factual things.
Yes.
And that right wing activism doesn't get financed by mainstream corporate. And to a certain extent that is true.
I wonder what is right wing activism. It's kind of like I mean, I know that they. There's
a range of things.
I know that they were
anti-abortion.
There you go. Yeah.
There's
there are issues. I'm trying to rack my mind. Anti-gay marriage stuff.
Anti-gay marriage, but also just like right to work.
Yeah, the ALEC stuff.
Yeah, ALEC.
Right?
Yeah, I went to
stand your ground laws. I feel stupid.
I went to a job fair. I went to a job fair at CPAC, and the ALEC and all those places have a Koch Institute. They all have their brochures for working for them, and there's the. And I actually listened to. It was great. I overheard these people were like out of a movie. These two recruiters who were like trying to recruit people for. Republican races,
right?
And but they're just clearly Republican Party projects. They're not like true believers or whatever. And whenever they didn't have like people around, they would just start talking about their solar panels in their house or whatever.
Now, did they know you were a lefty? Like, they know you're a leftist person? Like, when you're there, do you have to, like, hide? Do you have to pretend you're one of them?
I didn't have to. I chose to.
Yeah.
Like, I think I asked a question at one of the panels or whatever, about like, one of the environmental panels, where I, like, got your question, but I put it in, like, right-wing language.
Yeah.
But I didn't really put much effort into
concealing
into concealing. I was mostly just there and watching.
Yeah.
It's just there's so much going on, so much to hear that I was just listening.
God.
But yeah, so from that experience and other experiences, I didn't find the Trump that surprising, because he's
no, me neither.
And but I really want to emphasize that. I think liberals and leftists really, really, really do underestimate how much right-wingers think they're voting for the lesser evil. And they have all the same arguments. It's very much the same. They just have different values.
I mean,
and if you don't understand that, you're going to be continually surprised by their psychology and and how they react to certain incidents
and their strength politically. Because I mean, okay, so like the consensus line seems to be among a lot of left people and liberals that like more left people that Trump doesn't stand a chance nationally. Like there's just no chance possibly that he can win, and I feel like there is.
I think this is wishful thinking.
Yeah, Clinton is a weak candidate.
I mean, to a certain extent, there's also just voter manipulation. So the populations that are going to be most against Trump, that you can suppress the vote from those groups. But in general, I also think it's dangerous. I think there's like this, if not racism, there's a little bit of this, stereotype that like, well, of course, this person says these bad things that, like, we liberals and leftists can clearly, bright as day, see is racist crap, and thus no person of color will ever vote for them, or no woman will ever vote for them.
It's bullshit.
It's just not how. That's just not how it works for people.
Nope.
And that, like, obviously CPAC was predominantly white, but I saw non-white people there too, and I saw women there too, and then I think that I heard Phyllis Schlafly talk.
Wow.
I really
that's kind of amazing.
I put a lot of effort into getting all the hits.
Yeah. She's like the original Ann Coulter.
Yeah, and she talked like, a veteran sort of dispirited activist. Our experience fighting the Equal Employment Bill, and there's a real audience and a lot of emphasis on anti-free market stuff. And that's always been a part of our politics, but it seems in post-financial crisis that's definitely getting emphasized a lot more. I think that, especially if Democrats are not going to give anything, if they're not going to be providing any support at all to giving anything material to people, that I don't think you should be surprised that people are just not that interested.
Right.
I mean, and they don't even have to vote for Trump. They just have to not vote. And they just have to be completely dejected from that.
And it's kind of amazing to think that this election will be an election in which people are voting from a negative position, like on both sides.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm not voting for a candidate. I'm voting against the other candidate, and that's it. And I mean, that to me indicates something very, very wrong. But I mean, there's a lot of talk right now about this kind of millennial generation that you seem to be a part of, and I'm probably on the latest possible end of that, if I could, because I don't think I really fall into Generation X. But I certainly, join the millennial generation. If there's anything I join the millennial generation, it's with having a ton of student loans and feeling like there's no jobs that are ever going to be able to pay them off. And in other words, economic issues are a big part of like what I think about and fueling my own politics just from my own life. Is that something, because you mentioned 2008 being a big moment for you, like how much did that kind of financial crisis and the millennial thing like form kind of how you're thinking?
For me, primarily it was an intellectual thing. It was just like, first of all, I went to the last high school I finally transferred to was a great high school, little high school in the Upper West Side. That's all like discussion-based classes.
Wow,
and
like a college.
Choose your own courses.
Cool.
A public school too.
Yeah.
Really part of like a legacy of the fights, getting waivers from the regents and all that.
The last scraps of the liberal state.
Yeah. And it's just one of those great places where it's like, oh, there's this issue that came up, and it's like a month or two before. Why don't we teach a class on it? Where we're more or less just like going to be reading selections from newspapers or whatever. And that they did the class like that in January 2009 for the financial crisis.
That's awesome.
And it was amazing. There was this room that since has been painted over to a certain extent, unfortunately, but was at the time a graffiti chalk room where you could chalk anywhere.
Right. And
they erased a bunch of stuff so that they could do a visual representation of securitization. And so you can just like visually see the like.
Wow, it's kind of incredible to have that explained to you at that age. Yeah. And I have a feeling that wasn't taking place at a lot of high schools around the country.
No.
Yeah, and I mean, that being said, I mean, the kind of fact of the Bernie Sanders movement, whatever you want to call that, is that young people are supporting him at a rate like more than they've ever supported a candidate, right?
Yeah.
And young people are really into Bernie Sanders, and that seems to be. Not, I don't read it as a Bernie bro phenomena. I read it as an economic phenomenon. Yeah. And it seems to be like there are people that were like you, and that they know what's going on.
Yeah, I think there's just lived experience. I also just don't think you have to get that deep into it to kind of have that, like, this is fucked up and there has to be something we can do about it. And
it takes like an hour documentary on YouTube to understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like you can get for the broad political strokes of let's support this guy who who we think we can trust to deal with it, or at least actually advocate for us. I don't think it takes that much effort. I mean, if anything, most of the intellectual effort is just like debunk the cutesy things that are supposed to make common sense not work. Like a ton of economics is just simplistic models that are supposed to suggest that your common sense doesn't work and doesn't function, and actually, like, you want to support poor people, actually you can't raise the minimum wage, you should probably even lower it because it'll raise their employment rates or whatever. And that, like, a lot of the intellectual effort is just debunking stuff like that, rather than just like wherever common sense goes. And I'm not saying common sense can get you everywhere, but in terms of like broad things of supporting Bernie is going to be the thing that I might have economic possibilities in my future. That you don't need to go that far.
Yeah, it does. It's not. It actually isn't that hard, I think, to read the appropriate candidate in this election, and yet there are the people that support Hillary Clinton. I've had a few unfortunate run-ins with them online. Are tending, like, this is some of the most vicious shit that I hear from them, to the point where I don't even believe they're even liberal left at all. I mean, they say things that are just fucking garbage. And their tactics, not only are tactics in supporting policies that are really, like, insanely obnoxious, it really reminds me of the 2008 election. I had to remember how nasty Hillary Clinton's people were during that election too.
I mean, there's a great video
really fucking gross
of her literally talking about, RFK got killed in June.
Yeah, right. Several times she said that.
Yeah. But it's this whole interview. It's like, I think you should campaign for every vote. She got she's just sort of throwing everything against the wall, and it's like first of all, like, everything that the Clintonites are saying now is contradiction to what she said at the time, and
I just don't get how that they have these legions of people. I mean, I know part of the people online are like, there's like a paid phenomenon, but I've also had run-ins with just people I know online that I'm not friends with anymore online that have just, like, they have this thing of like, Trump must be defeated. And
it's understandable. Like, I totally understand the,
it's just
like,
such a
Trump
fearful position to be in.
Yeah, I understand it completely. And in some ways, Trump is like the perfect Democrat foil.
Yes.
He's the perfect, because, like, you can sort of it's really hard to get it up for, like, we need to stop Romney. Romney is gonna be so much worse. Like, no one really believes shit like that.
Right.
And when you hear, like, this is the most important election in a generation, when it's fucking Romney versus Obama, like, it's very hard to, like, it was losing the kick. It's like it's like some stimulus that you're injecting in your blood, and you're starting to build up a resistance. And, like, Trump is like this, like, the mega version, the most, like, pure version. It's like, oh, this isn't stepped on at all.
Yeah,
we can get this is pure. This is pure fear.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I
and
so
just
I understand
pure megalomania and everything else. I mean, he appeals to a very, very base instinct among voters, but at the same time, there's this feeling that it's like no one knows who's voting for Trump. But I feel like it is. We do know who's voting for Trump, right? It's not like necessarily just a bunch of stupid poor people, which is what a lot of Democrats and Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, it's so weird that
it's like middle class whites that are voting for Trump.
Yeah,
it's the Republican Party
and
people.
upper middle class. And
yeah,
I think there are affluent people and maybe working class people, but working class people with 2 decent incomes. They're not like at the bottom of this system. But it's really amazing how, like, we're so afraid of Trump, we'll try anything except for substantive policy. Like, we're willing to do anything to stop Trump except, support some reasonable reform.
Or come to terms with the anger that's on our side of the aisle. You know what I mean? I mean, there's just kind of like this denial that Bernie Sanders has any appeal at all. They're just kind of like, well, that's just. I mean, this Bernie Bro line is kind of brilliant, actually, because it just so. But it's also like
it's also such a Twitter thing.
Yeah,
it's just like Twitter.
Like my parents don't know what fucking Bernie Bros.
No
are.
No one. They've
never heard that term in their life.
No one knows except for like a few of the online people who read a few of the online sites that aren't on Twitter and getting it from Twitter obsessed journalists, like at Salon or whatever,
right?
And
oh God.
then a Twitter, and then people who are like frequent Twitter.
I don't know why I even look at Twitter. I mean, it's just a fucking cesspool. Do you ever feel like it's useless?
Econ and finance Twitter is actually a lot better. Yeah. It's like much better to be on the left side of econ and finance Twitter than it is to be to be on just like left side of political Twitter.
Right. You're saying I'm not following the right people, is what you're saying, right?
Sort of, but it's just a different environment. I mean, I'm also just the conversations are useful to me insofar as they're like more technical discussions, and there's
and
representing the left side.
You clarify your own feelings on things too. Right?
Yeah. I mean, if you really want to get into arguments over the technicalities of negative interest rate policy,
right? I didn't know how I felt about the fucking gorilla thing until I Facebook 50 times.
I was not like we were talking about this earlier. I can't believe that's a thing.
The gorilla thing. Yeah, I can. I feel like in a way
not to
we're
the level
slaves
of
to these stories. We're slaves to these social media stories. I have no doubt that obviously a gorilla was actually killed at a zoo, but at the same time, it's almost like there's this kind of like every day there's a tray that corporations on Facebook and social media hold that tray up to American people and say, talk about this, right? And it's like it coming from a time when I do remember prior to social media. I do remember the world before that, and I do remember kind of like a more a different level, a different tone of conversation, a different kind of conversation. I'm not the kind of guy that's like things were better or things were worse. I think we're living through an incredibly complicated transitional moment with technology and communication, but at the same time, this fucking like social media phenomenon of let's all fucking fight about this one thing today and then forget about it the next day seems incredibly unproductive.
Yeah, I mean, and I get to a certain extent, but I also I have my own things going on in terms of like obsessively researching something or like interested in a topic, getting into a topic. And so like that kind of stuff can distract me from the social media wars.
Sure. Yeah.
And actually have some actual productive use of my time.
Well, speaking of production, I mean, you went to school, and you're going to school. Is that right?
I'm transferring back. I've been off from school for a year, doing kind of my own.
Okay, so I mean, what are you studying? What are you interested in?
I sort of like for me, the financial crisis was like, it was like economics, and this is so interesting, and all the quote-unquote experts that are like being put in front of me seem to have no idea what they're talking about, and they're really interested in me. And when I get into something, I was just like really get into something, and I basically like had this like almost like 4 or 5 year period where I was just purely just like constantly reading things in economics. I was just so fascinated by this whole period, and so that's sort of like, I mean, there was a point where I took a break from that and sort of burnt out, but basically that's kind of like my thing. I always have a bunch of different things going on. Right now, what I've been predominantly working on, I mentioned before, has been economics before the Civil War, and that's like a really fascinating period.
So why is that? Why do you land on that? Because I mean, I have friends that are Civil War professor types, and the people that get into that era, whether it be antebellum, Civil War, Reconstruction, that is like for them the key to understanding everything. And whenever I hear them, I'm like, I agree, I love that era, but I'm primarily a 20th century historian. But what is it about the antebellum era that drew you? Like, how'd you find that?
Well, So one of the things that I just got interested in is just the more basic question of like, how did this system work? Because there's from an economics point of view, from someone who's interested in like money and monetary issues, the antebellum period is like really fascinating and weird,
right?
And actually, almost shockingly, I don't when I came to it, I didn't really feel like there was any source that had really adequately dealt with how the system worked as a whole. There were papers that were like on pieces of it, but there was no like, this is how this system in broad terms, this is how this system worked as a whole. And so that was really fascinating to me.
Yeah, those are difficult. Those are difficult topics to research. Yeah. I mean, are you a math person? Are you like, is that kind of are numbers and data?
A lot of it is just been like primary source documents. So a lot of it is just like, so yeah, I'm interested in the statistical stuff too, and there's stuff that I need to substantiate. But I was just like interested, like actually real basic questions, like what could you pay your taxes with, and on what terms could you pay your taxes with them? Yeah. And that's like, surprising it might be, that was a question that like really wasn't really answered in the literature. Yeah. Like in the literature I was reading. So I've literally been going into tax receivability documents or documents that like statutes or whatever that have been digitized, and just trying to find through search keywords the right things for each state.
So are you talking about like the kind of like the physical aspect of paying your taxes?
Yeah, can you? So, for example,
like what offices do you go to? How is this administered?
To a certain extent, administered, but like even just so, can you pay your taxes with a banknote?
Right.
And if so, what banks and on what terms could those be accepted? And it was like a question that like hadn't really been dealt with in literature, and it's so much of the answer is wrapped up in how banking works. Yeah, in the system.
That's why I want to kind of ask is kind of where are you headed with that? Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, like, what is the larger significance?
The huge big picture is actually I have this paper that I'm still finishing, because you can imagine getting all those tax documents and getting it for each state is a pain in the ass.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Is why wasn't there a dollar zone crisis? Mm-hmm. So the broad strokes question is essentially, this is a monetary union that was created in this by the Constitution. Why didn't it just like collapse on its face? Why aren't they having an existential crisis the way Europe is now? And so that's like the broadest question I had. And so to answer that, I had to figure out the tax receivability stuff, as well as some other banking things and so some other things. But that was like the broadest, the broadest strokes question I had.
It reminds me of the moment, which was, one of 10,000 insane moments in Republican debates this year, of Ted Cruz saying that his system, like his IRS, he would eliminate the IRS, and like the debate moderator asked him, like, what would how would you collect taxes then? And he says, like, we would just have a postcard, like everyone would just do a postcard, like Facebook as a corporation would just turn in a single postcard, and you as an individual would turn in just a single postcard. And then they're like, but how are you going to, like, you still have to have an office? And he's like, well, we will have one small office to process the postcard. And it sounded like, he was talking about a system from 200 years ago, but also just like...
That's really unfair to the system 200 years ago. Right?
Batshit insane.
Yeah.
Fucking really weird.
Yeah.
Like, how could he believe that would work? Yeah. It's just beyond me.
Yeah. I mean, but to me, it's sort of easy how someone could get there when you just have no idea how it actually works.
Right. But Ted Cruz, I don't think of Ted Cruz as like stupid, really. I think of him as like kind of crazy, but not necessarily stupid.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's so hard to tell. I mean, there's a certain level at which it doesn't matter.
Right.
Like, it's just like he's just saying whatever he's saying.
You're just an anomalous creature I can't understand. Yeah, and you must be extinguished somehow. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and so back on that thing, and what's interesting digging. So the reason for me it's important is basically like how far banks can get off the rails,
right?
Because if banknotes are, if you can just always pay your taxes with this bank's banknotes, no matter what,
right.
and this bank is just like let off the chain, that's craziness. That's that's Bank of America now,
right.
Essentially. And so there ends up to have to be all these constraints. There has to be an insolvency constraint, where if the bank is negative equity or undercapitalized, there's regulators who shut the bank down. Then there's, in normal times, quote unquote normal times, there's the bank has to still pay out gold and silver. And that's the requirement. And literally they have it's based on proclamation. I was reading one of these tax receivability documents. I think it was Mississippi, and it was as soon as we figure out the bank is not paying out gold or silver anymore, by proclamation the governor will declare that those notes aren't acceptable anymore, and each tax collector will have to sign an affidavit stating that they're that the notes that they're handing in from this bank were collected before they heard of the governor's proclamation. And that's kind of there's a way in which the tax receivability stuff interacts with your banking policy. How you essentially insurance. And New York actually had an insurance system called the safety fund system in the 1829 to the 1830s. And they actually did the reverse, which was they had this insurance system, but they had this quirk where when the bank stopped paying out specie, but gold or silver, the notes weren't tax receivable anymore, even though there's an insurance fund that's supposed to cover them.
Right.
So if you're going to get paid off by insurance, but they're not tax receivable now, then you just hold on to them, unless you're super desperate. And so they were the system's crazy. So they passed an emergency law saying all the notes are tax receivable. And so the note went back up to trading at at par, essentially. So there's a way in which tax receivability, even though they don't have they're not allowed to print money, quote unquote, is a way of doing an insurance scheme. And there's a lot of similarities to Europe now, where there's no the Greece can't the Greek government can't create euros or whatever. And because they're electronic, it can't or hasn't figured out a system, or isn't even thinking of a system in which the euros of their banks are tax receivable no matter what.
You know what I'm thinking about as I'm hearing you is I asked you on the show in part because of your kind of socialist politics, and you're kind of left politics, which is obviously harshly critical or against capitalism. So I mean, and yet you're interested in learning the inner workings.
Oh yeah, no, I am a complete slave.
Because for me, I just hear the details, and I'm oh god, it all sounds like this is the inner workings of evil. And so because I've got that kind of position away from it. But it sounds like, when you get into it, you get a different story.
For me, I'm just I want to understand exactly how this system works.
Yeah.
And kind of deal with the deep issue. And the thing about...
And what its historical roots are.
And the thing is actually, sometimes it's so much worse once you, actually understand the
That's
system.
what I wanted to know.
Because there's actually a great book... Oh, God, I'm blanking on the name. It's it's something like Slave Markets and Financial Markets from a decade ago. It's by the guy Kilburn from 2006. And he did great archival work on the Bank of the United States,
right?
The former second Bank of the United States, the former central bank, and his whole thing was on basically the second Bank of the United States was extremely invested in slavery. So part of what the Bank of the United States, how it kept the system going, was that it would basically buy people's local IOUs. Some businessmen or some slave traders or just regular mercantile traders IOU, and give its own notes, which were acceptable in federal taxes and often a lot of state taxes, and so that they were the one good money everywhere.
They're trading debt already.
Yeah. And they're all they're doing. They don't deal in government bonds or whatever. They deal in people's private debts. And so the thing that's really difficult about slavery and slave trading is that you have these states, you have the states like Mississippi or whatever, who you want to sell slaves to, but all they got is their local crap,
right?
And you don't really want their local crap, and so. Or it's like really difficult or risky to hold on to like the Mississippi notes of this random bank. So what you want is to be able to get their IOU and be able to discount it, basically sell it off. And you want to be able to either sell it back at your home New York bank or Maryland bank or whatever, or you wanted to sell it to the second bank. And so the second bank, by buying and selling, but mostly buying and holding these bills of exchange, basically facilitated interstate transactions. And this is one of those times when like they're doing a really good job of making the system work.
Right.
And making the system work is like one of the most horrific things that you can,
right.
Because basically without what they were doing, it would have been maybe not impossible, but financially much more difficult to do the internal migration.
So they're streamlining the monstrosity.
Yeah. They're essentially financing the internal slave migration of 1 million slaves from border states like Maryland to the Deep South, but it gets worse because they're not supposedly not directly invested in slaves, but they're buying up the IOUs of all these slavers, all these slave owners, and they're also extending loans. They're also directly lending Bank of the United States notes to them, but then the Bank of the United States loses its charter, basically because state banks hate it,
right?
Because it's impinging on their power, and they. And then there's also the Panic of 1837, which it's bad everywhere, but it's especially bad in the South.
Right.
So none of these places can pay their debts. So the Bank of the United States, it still exists. It's just now there's a Pennsylvania Bank of the United States, and then it's been given permission to hold all the stock of all the what used to be branches of the Bank of the United States. There were branches everywhere. It was the only federal branch system, essentially. And what Kilburn did was he went into those archives and he found all these documents essentially showing that the Bank of the United States en masse foreclosed on Southern plantation owners. So the Bank of the United States, the former Bank of the United States now, owned slaves en masse.
Wow.
They massive owners. Essentially like it's like the Federal Reserve, lost its charter and had to foreclose on a bunch of people, and all those people were like slave owners.
Yeah.
It's literally that. And not only that, but they're having it's a down market.
Yeah.
So they're having a real difficulty selling off their inventory of slaves. So they start just working plantations. So they start just, putting the plantations back in activity. And they're literally hiding it from There's like abolitionist board members that they're like hiding that they're doing this from.
The like pace and horror of slavery is accelerated to make up for the malfeasance of financial elites.
Hey,
wow, that sounds fucking familiar.
There's financial assets. They're financial assets. They're our source of income. They're a source of wealth, and we need to unwind this bank. We need to liquidate, and liquidate means working these people.
This is a long fucking story. I was just talking to my friend about 75 people were shot in Chicago, mostly black, this past week, and my friend, who's a very Civil War type person, was kind of tracing that racial history and saying, there are suits at the end of all those triggers being pulled. You know what I mean? Like we need not fucking police things at the bottom to figure out to kind of take care of this problem. We need to head towards the suits that are fucking creating policies that are creating these like ridiculous social phenomena that are inexcusable. It's fucking amazing.
I mean, I'm trying to remember who said it, but someone's line was like, "There's no fleet of 747s in the hood.
Right. Yeah.
Like this stuff, drugs, all this stuff.
Sure.
Is like, there are things coming up from high up.
Yeah.
And it's
scary
shit. And I just to me the antebellum stuff to me is like really getting a sense of like technically how this goes. And there's all sorts of implications. So one of like as I was drawing was the Eurozone crisis, but one is just like to get a really deep sense of like when this system is working can still be like the most horrific.
Yeah.
I was reading a
paper, I think that's a really important thing.
I was reading a paper of someone who's arguing that so there's this whole thing there was like a great moderation between the late 80s and 90s into the 2000s up to the financial crisis. There was this whole narrative before the financial crisis that we'd like volatility had fallen and we were finally knew how to beat the business cycle, yada yada. And this paper that was arguing essentially that there was a great moderation in the 1840s up to the Civil War.
Wow.
And there's just like that there was this like and the paper is actually pretty convincing.
Yeah.
But it's also like yes, 1850 is still pretty fucking horrific.
Yes.
For most people.
Yeah.
And also pretty horrific for white working class people too.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
I've ever seen documents of the bankruptcy proceedings.
Yeah.
There's this one story of like in the 1830s of this like single mom who was foreclosed on for like $5.66 debt, and she was not foreclosed. She was imprisoned.
Wow.
And she was imprisoned for it with her newborn, and kept down there. And then there was like the newborn was like crying so much that eventually like her lawyer had permission to take the newborn out of the prison to get like some sunlight, and then the baby dies like a few hours later, or a couple days later, or whatever. And it's just like yes, even keeping track of that $5.60 is a lot more back then.
Yeah.
Even with that, it's just the most insane.
And American history is filled with shit like that you hardly ever hear about.
And there's a lot of indentured servitude and a lot of foreclosing on. There are a lot of like selling white people off in the antebellum period too.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
and
that's something that like really gets under this is just how like fundamental this system was in terms of like, if you were able-bodied, quote unquote, and not having a job, that was your fault, and therefore we have the like right to.
And
just,
I feel like we are very much going back to that in a lot of ways.
100%. I
attitudes.
mean, welfare reform was the first step of that, and there's definitely a sense in which I've read a lot of papers now that are. One of the things I'm also interested in is indentured servitude. Of like, when did legal indentured servitude end? Right. And it's sort of like, it can be, from one angle, it can be just a trick question. But it's a lot of the stuff with student debt now is like, if they had to put you in prison to get at, get out the money you owe for non-payment of student loans, that'd be basically just a straightforward violation of the 13th Amendment. Yeah. But because they control the banking system and can directly deduct it from your paycheck, well, we didn't need to send you to prison, therefore it's not violating the 13th Amendment. For a certain sense, that stuff is complete BS. And there's similar things with bankruptcy laws. The 2005 Bankruptcy Act really tightened and then I think there's certain. I'm trying to remember which act it was, but there's a certain bankruptcy that you go through where it's essentially they restructure the debts as a lien against your future income, right? Where you can go to jail for non-work. Jesus. And so like
go to jail for non-work.
Because you're not paying your debts.
What are you in for? I didn't work.
I mean, you're sort of like getting, and that's definitely like where they want to go. It's very clear that's what they're interested in.
Well, I hope someone writes like a rap musical about all this, and then we can we can all figure. Now that we can all move on.
You talk about the antebellum period and nostalgia. Yes, you have to talk a little bit about Hamilton because it really revolts me. Like
you haven't even seen it, right?
I haven't seen it. This is my preference
because I don't have an extra $900.
I haven't seen it. and I haven't listened to the album. Okay, I tried to listen to the album, but I didn't. Yeah. Just the concept is just so revolting to me, and it really bothers me that leftists seem to like have this like thing where they want to like rescue rescue Hamilton, and it's just like
Hamilton was always the villain of early American history to me.
I mean, he is a. I mean, we were talking. I said this to you before that.
But if he raps, he's not a villain anymore. Yeah.
I said this to you before that he's the Timothy Geithner of the founding period. Like he's Morris is Larry Summers.
Can you imagine Geithner the musical in like 100 years?
Oh, definitely 100, 10 years. 10 years.
Yo.
We're talking about how Trump actually wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
And Geithner actually had.
Guy's going to be this like plucky rapping immigrant.
Yeah, exactly. Or he's just going to be he never got a graduate degree. Greenspan was surprised that he didn't have a graduate degree. He's just this precocious guy who worked his way up the ranks.
Sounds like just a young, hungry thug.
Yeah,
exactly.
And,
we live in an embarrassing fucking age in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and the Hamilton stuff, like this.
Hamilton is like a South Park. Like it's like South Park, but not like it's done for real. You know what I mean? Like this seems like a fucking parody, but it's for real.
Yeah, it's like I couldn't actually process that this is like a thing they're doing. I mean, Hamilton is the dude who threatened a coup and tried to threaten a military coup and tried to get George Washington involved in it on behalf of bondholders. Like literally, this is this dude, and like. American society is so debased now and is so dominated by financial interests and by the fire sector, financial insurance, real estate.
As Jefferson said in 1820 before he died, he was emotionally shattered to recognize that the country had become bebanked, bedollared, and bewhiskeyed. and I feel like that's where we're at now.
Yeah, I mean, Jefferson is not his own. Yeah. He's got his...
But compared to Hamilton... I mean,
it's really hard. I don't know. I'm kind of
in terms of like the large scale vision of the country. I think that they're.
No, I'm gonna pox on all their houses kind of guy. I'm sort of with William Hoagland and those people. That, like the people who really matter from those period are like Herman Husband. Or the only one who's really recognized as sort of a founding father, Thomas Paine. Like that like they as Hoagland mentioned in an interview I did with him that. Like these people actually have something to do with the history of the left.
Yeah, right.
And that there's something like actually important and interesting about these figures and about and like Herman Husband is like insane great guy who led two rebellions, a rebellion before the Revolutionary War and a rebellion after, and like was almost killed for both. And what basically was killed the second time, and like these are the people that the left should be rescuing and talking about, and just like more conversation. Yes, Hamilton did some decent development policy, the same way a lot of dictatorships go, and yes, he was against one share, one vote. And so we'll give that to him.
Yeah,
where he wanted you to get smaller fractions of a vote as you owned more shares, which that's a nice little thing. But overall, like. This is fucking horrible.
I don't think I'm gonna like the Jefferson rap musical either. Inevitable.
Yeah. And just the whole racial angle is really disturbing to me. The fact that like we're going to get around the like it's all white people thing.
Yeah.
That by just casting people in those roles,
people of color,
casting people of color in those roles, but like and just like not really deal with the racial issues and all, and then
actually I think it's like I think that that what people see in this is that the people of color draw power from being cast in those positions. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
which is disturbing like element of it. I mean, I get why. Like I understand that the need to recover that kind of like agency, but at the same time, it's not recover. It's like not recovering agency to like play those characters. I don't know. People that like Hamilton are really see Beyonce as a revolutionary figure too. You know what I mean? The same type of fucking people.
Yeah, it's the same type of shit. And I mean, in many ways, all kind of like, you know, the DC New York circuit.
Yeah.
The people who all have a lot of experience taking the Acela line.
Mm-hmm.
That those types of people love Hamilton because they see in that musical, which is a very mainstream, boring take on that story, is they see in that basically their own debates and arguments. They imagine themselves to be having these grand arguments that the founding fathers are having
that place in history,
and not having all the like fucking horrible things that they're doing that the musical puts under the rug and they want to put under the rug too. I mean, and to the point where it's really having not just like horrific that there's this musical, but it's really having bad impacts in terms of rescuing Hamilton's reputation.
Yeah.
And like now
he's still going to be on the 10.
And now there's like a lot of people who believe that Hamilton like didn't have like racial problems or didn't deal in slavery, which is just not true. It's just not true. He married into a slave owning family. It's just like all this stuff is just like but he was a member of, you know, the Manumission Society, so therefore,
and he was part of like a sexy duel battle, you know, like there's all that element of it too. It's pretty fucking
he died in a shootout. You know, we can you can't be that bad. I mean, there's. Yeah,
it really is too perfect, and watching it has been depressing. Watching it, and I say watching it like be a phenomenon.
But leftists really like seem to like want to jump on and join this. I mean, I've met Christian Perenni. I like his stuff in general, but that. I really didn't like the reading Hamilton from the left piece.
I haven't even seen that. I gotta check that out.
Yeah, it's I talked about it with in an interview I did with Hoagland.
Okay.
And it was just sort of like it's just sort of like this fantasy.
Yeah.
And people. I mean, the left has always had this to a certain extent. It'd be like a nostalgic mistake to think that. The founding father this kind of issues with the founding fathers is a new thing. We might have it in more in a debased form, but leftists have always wanted to recapture the founding fathers themselves. I mean, you know, it was kind of sort of mainline Communist Party stuff too. Talk about the founding fathers, and there's all these. I mean,
Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. I mean, the leftists in the United States, their kind of love of Ho Chi Minh was they described him as the George Washington of his country. They love that he kind of used the Declaration of Independence as the kind of formation for a lot of his politics, and like leftists love that Ho Chi Minh was like a founding father, and they tried to like really like they had a really kind of like weird patriotic thing going on there. That I mean, I'm with you.
Always like people. I mean, and I have nothing against colonial struggles wanting to recapture that propagandistically. More power to them.
Right.
But I mean, the foundational one would be the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah, of course.
You know, there was like not that was within living memory of those people. They you know turned that back around.
Yeah.
But there's with the Black Jacobins, there's sort of an irony to it.
Yeah.
Just like. Yes, we are capturing this thing. We are just like you, but
God.
There's and the irony of that has been completely lost, and it's just been completely like serious. And I think the American left is in the position where it should just be able to honestly say a pox on all these people's houses.
Yeah.
Just every single one. Just throw the entire. These are the people talking about checking the democracy.
Yeah.
The unruly mob who we can't let democracy rule in the United States.
Well, I think we are in a pox on both their houses moment in a very light way. I'd like to see a lot more of it as the years go on. But Nathan Tankus, it has been a pleasure listening to your story. I appreciate you sitting down with me. Thank you.